In section 1 of chapter 1, Early Humans and the Rise of Civilization, we're going to be looking at several things. And there's some key words that you're going to have to familiarize yourself with in order to keep up. You're definitely going to want to know the difference between archaeology and anthropology. You're also going to hear some words like hominid, Homo sapiens, and the out of Africa theory. Those are our content vocabulary words. We also have academic vocabulary words that we're going to be looking at that will help you in other academic areas outside of history as well. Those words are theory and survive. So our essential question for this lesson is, what do archaeology and anthropology teach us about prehistoric humans? Well, first we're going to have to dig in and look at what are some of the things that we use to actually learn about these prehistoric humans, and then we'll figure out what those things can teach us. Okay, here we have a picture of prehistoric and modern tools. What we're going to end up doing later on in just a few minutes is we're going to match these tools, the prehistoric ones, then to the tools that maybe they might be now. So keep that in mind as we go through them. Let's look at certain things about these tools. We want to know what these prehistoric men and women, for that matter, would have used these tools for, how they might have been helpful. So let's take a look at a few things. What sort of functions do you think the pictured tools had? Think about that for a minute. We've got a tool in tool F that is kind of looks like a more rounded tool. Tool E looks more like a knife blade. Tool B looks like more of a puncturing device. So these tools had different uses to prehistoric man. So we have to put ourselves in his shoes and see, what might we use these things for? What might we use these tools for today? Some of these tools had sharp edges. They were made for cutting. Others were used for scraping, and the more blunt tools were probably made for hammering or smashing things. What use would you have for scraping something as a prehistoric man? Think about that for a second. If you have any familiarity with Native Americans, you know that they use buffalo hides to make teepees, to make clothing, and you would have to scrape the inner material away from the actual hide. So you needed something that was probably more wide and had a wider blade on it and could take off more surface area than you would actually need a knife. I could see someone using tool D as a scraper of sorts, and I could see someone using maybe tool E as something to actually cut those hides into strips to be used for later. What are some common uses of modern tools that prehistoric people might have used their tools for? So let's look at our tools at the bottom, tools 1 through 6 labeled now. What are some of these modern tools that prehistoric man might have used these tools for? Obviously, I look directly at tool number 4. That's the first one that I see. That's a hatchet. It will be good for hacking down trees that you might need to use for shelter. Maybe you're going to take a few limbs off to set a trap for an animal. You might be able to use that same hatchet to make a spear from that tree limb. So that was the first one that jumped in mind. The second one that kind of came to mind was the hammer, used for pulverizing or crushing things. I think as a prehistoric caveman or a Paleolithic male, I think I would have been curious as to what properties different things would have if you crushed them. Maybe animal ivory. What could you do with that if you crushed it? Just different things like that. So as you look at these tools, as we move forward, try to come up with your own ideals of maybe what these tools may have been used for. Here's some examples: digging, scraping, cutting, hammering, puncturing, or crushing. These are all functions that we'll use until the end of time because they're all very human functions. The Paleolithic man, the early human, used these same tools under these same circumstances as we would today, whether it's building a shelter or hunting an animal for food. And later on, as we see systematic agriculture come about, you might see the shovel and some of these different tools used in farming. Now we're going to match each prehistoric tool on the left with its modern counterpart below it. Closely examine the shapes before you make an answer. You can write them down for yourself. If you're good enough, you can stick them in your head and memorize them, what answers you come up with. But right now, I need you to pause the presentation, take a few minutes, and come up with the matching answers. Here's a list of possible answers. Now, I say possible answers because there might be an argument for one tool to be another tool. We're not exactly sure. They didn't leave us a manual. So we're looking at A matches up with one. One is just a tool that I like to use sometimes if I'm painting or doing some sort of work with masonry a little bit. It helps to spread things out. I can't remember the exact name of it, what you actually call it, but I just call it an industrial strength spatula. B matches up to 5, which is what you would call a stiletto, a very thin, sharp knife. That would be good for puncturing things, again, such as animal hide or maybe an animal itself when you're out there hunting. C matches up to 2. That may have been a shovel, something to dig with, maybe digging for roots and different fungus such as mushrooms to eat. D matches up to 4, which is a hatchet. And as you can see, the hatchet blade is kind of shaped just like the tool in D. Obviously, it would have required a handle that it would have used a prehistoric hemp rope or some type of rope to tie the actual hatchet head to the handle. Object E is matched to number 3, which is a spade, a small spade, something that again is used today in masonry work, used to spread out materials of a gooey nature. When you think of someone laying brick or making a wall, they spread out the actual masonry fluid with it. And object F is matched to 6. That is supposed to be a hammer. It's hard to tell because it's not three-dimensional, but I guess it could be a hammer. Our guiding question that we always want to come back to is, how do we define and learn information about prehistory? How do we go about the business of learning these things and finding out stuff? What can we get from it? And that's what we're going to look at today, and the differences in anthropology and archaeology. So what we're studying is the prehistory of human beings. Understand that history is truly things that have been written down and recorded by man. Prehistory are things that we're just piecing together from what they left behind with no real story to go on. We all have to fill in the blanks and be investigative journalists ourselves. History and prehistory. Prehistory is the time before writing was developed. In the absence of written records, scientists who study prehistoric times must use other evidence to learn about early humans. Let's look at now anthropology. It's the study of human life and culture. So we're studying this human life and this culture through these artifacts, these things that we find. And we have to, again, fill in the blanks by gathering information, looking at how other civilizations may have used them, how we use them today, and make these comparisons. The branches of study of the human life and culture. This includes the physical nature of the human life and culture, as we saw in our introduction yesterday. We saw skeletal bones, and these bones tell tales. If someone was injured in battle, you'll know it by studying the physical injuries that skeleton had. The other branches of study are social and cultural, linguistics, which are languages, and also the psychological aspects. So under anthropology, anthropologists study human life and culture by using these artifacts and fossils to create a picture of people's everyday lives. Archaeology, the scientific study of past human beings through the analysis of artifacts. So you have these artifacts that you're picking up, that you're finding out there, and you're putting together what these past human beings' lives were like. This is also studying the prehistory of human beings. And as prehistory is the time before written records, scientists and historians must rely on other evidence, such as these artifacts and fossils. The definition of archaeology: archaeologists study early societies. They analyze artifacts that people left behind, such as tools, weapons, and art. So we got to understand the difference in anthropology and archaeology. Archaeology is actually just the study of these past human beings through these artifacts, finding these things that they left behind: pottery, tools, and weapons, maybe even skeletons in the places that they lived in and how they lived in them. Anthropology is a study of human life and culture. You could be an anthropologist and study someone's life and culture that is currently here today. An archaeologist is someone who is looking back to the past and applying an anthropological view of things through these artifacts that they find. So you can be an anthropologist and you can study the life and culture of high school students at KCHS, how do they behave physically? What are their social and cultural behaviors and the ways that the languages that they use? What are their psychological strong suits or weak points? That's what an anthropologist is. Now, an archaeologist will come along 2 million years from now and find the things that we left behind here at KCHS. Imagine them finding KCHS in a state of, holes in the walls where everything was still out 2 million years from now. Those all will be artifacts for them to piece together the stories of how we lived our life and to then become anthropologists through the actual workings of being an archaeologist. Art and artifacts of early humans. What we have here is the skull of Australopithecus. Australopithecus was one of the first human-like creatures. It could walk upright and had small canine teeth similar to humans. An amazingly intact Australopithecus skeleton was found by the anthropologist Donald Johanson at the Hadar, Ethiopia research site in 1974. Nicknamed Lucy, the skeleton is about 3.2 million years old. This photograph shows an Australopithecus afarensis skull. So this on the map on the right shows you the area of the world of Africa and Ethiopia where Lucy was first discovered in 1974. Remarkably, it looks a lot like a human skull. So this is what the art and artifacts, an artifact of an early human would be classified as. One of the things we talked about in our introduction yesterday was the advent of arts, paintings on cave walls. Paleolithic humans were artists. One of the best proofs of this is at the Lascaux cave in France. The walls are covered with hundreds of painted animals, including oxen, deer, bison, and horses. The paintings are an estimated 17,000 years old. One wall from the famous Lascaux cave shown here contains animal paintings. And we talked about earlier why they would have painted animals. These animals were their life. It was how they survived, whether it be from making shelters or clothing, using the hides and the fur for warmth, the meat for food, the bones for weapons and tools. These animals were early humans' lifeblood, and that's why they would have painted these creatures, these animals. Maybe they even worshiped them to a degree. Maybe that's why they painted them. But those are the types of things that archaeologists will infer from finding these artifacts of early humans. Let's identify a few artifacts here. We want to explain how scientists would answer the following questions about this prehistoric tool. So let's put yourselves in the scientific seat. You're the scientist. The archaeologist has found this tool and brought it to you, and they're asking you to do some forensic work on it. How would you identify this tool? You're going to have some common questions. Well, first thing you might want to know is, how old is this tool? It's no good to find a tool that, at a burial site and it's only 60 years old if you're looking for something thousands of years old. So the first thing you need to know is, how old is this tool? Who may have made this tool? You may get this tool from the next question. You might get the answer for who the tool is made from the question of, what was the tool used for? So if the tool was used for war, well, maybe the warrior or the head of the chieftain head made this tool. Was this tool used for cooking? Was this tool used for skinning a zebra? You have to understand these things. They all interconnect. And where did it come from? That's one of the final questions to wrap things up, is where did it come from? Did it come from a place where you would find something like this? And let me clarify that statement. You might not find a tool for cutting down trees in the desert, right? If you did, where did it come from? How did it end up here? If you did find a tool for cutting down trees in a forest, you could understand, okay, well, this tool came from a forest. It could have been used for this purpose of cutting down trees. It just kind of helps you tell the whole story all together. So right now, what I want you to do is try to find the answers to these questions. You're going to pause the presentation until you found the answer for those 4 questions, and then you will compare your answers with mine in just a few seconds. Okay, so here's our answer. Our first question is, how old is this tool? Well, scientists use radiocarbon dating and or thermoluminescence to determine the age of a prehistoric tool. This tool came from the Paleolithic age. Now, radiocarbon dating. Carbon has a half-life. Carbon is if you have taken chemistry class, you understand that carbon is an element and it has a standard decaying half-life. If you understand why they use carbon, is because all living things contain carbon. Once it dies, the carbon decays at a certain rate. So depending on how much carbon is left, they're able to, within reason, accurately date ancient artifacts by how radioactive the carbon is still left. The second question. Scientists use microscopic biological and chemical analysis of blood, hairs, and plant tissues left on prehistoric tubes to learn what a tool was used for. This tool was used for digging. So what they might have found is different minerals from the dirt of the area that it was from, different maybe plant parts, biological remnants that they can study in the lab. Now, if they were to find humanoid blood, human hair, different things like that on it, they might say, okay, this was a weapon of war. Maybe that weapon might have been, or that tool that has found human blood and hair, maybe it wasn't a weapon of war. What's another use as something that gets human blood on it that is not a vicious use? Medicine. If someone is going in for a surgery, those scalpels, if they weren't to sanitize them afterwards, and they were found thousands of years later, they would contain human blood for a very innocuous reason of, we did a surgery on someone and that's why there's blood on it. So, but you have to draw these comparisons and make these inferences on your own as an archaeologist or as a scientist discovering about these tools. And last question. Archaeologists and anthropologists study the location where a prehistoric tool was found, including other artifacts found there. They do this to determine who made the tool and where it came from. So again, location is important in conjunction with understanding who would have made this tool. You need to know where it came from and what its uses might have been. Here's a little food for thought. Think about 2 everyday items that you own, such as your cell phone or maybe even your backpack. If people in the future found these items at an archaeological site, what might they conclude about you or your society? Your answers are going to be different, but you should think of these things as clues. What might they think about your cell phone? What might they think about the things they find in your backpack? Take a few minutes, pause the presentation, and give it some thought. The use of fire. Paleolithic humans learned how to harness fire, and this gave them a leap forward in several respects. With fire, they could survive colder climates. Fire also kept wild animals away from the campsite. Hunters learned to use fire to flush out wild game. People gathered to trade stories and to cook around the campsite fire. Cooked food tasted better, lasted longer, and was easier to chew and digest. This image shows Zhuzhashan cave in China. The remains of 40 Paleolithic men, women, and children were found here, along with evidence that fire was used in the cave for cooking, heating, and lighting. Let's think about what these benefits of fire, what they translate into. I'll say, so the first one they say is, with fire they could survive colder climates. That means that even if they found somewhere that was nice during the spring, summer, and fall months, they could stay there during the winter. They did not have to pick up and leave. So now you can start to populate one particular area. Fire kept away wild animals. That's obviously a benefit. It's great to be able to sleep at night as a early human and know that these animals are afraid of fire. They won't come near us. Hunters learned to use this fire to flush out wild game. You could set a prairie on fire and animals would obviously run away from that, and then that game is now out in the open where you can hunt it more actively. People gather to trade stories around fire, so now we're starting to see the advent of community, of family coming together, where there's actually now some downtime and everything is not just centered around the hunt, the kill, and the eat. Now people can come together to eat. And make sure you have your phones off when you're in my class, please. People can now come together to eat and to socialize around a fire. Cooked food tasted better, it lasted longer, and was easier to chew and digest. Now you're going to start getting a more efficient caloric intake. What this means for the early man is now you start to grow bigger. The human form is bigger, stronger, faster, leading you to more competitive and more easier kills on the hunt, because now you're nourished to the fullest extent of your capabilities, and you're getting things from this meat that you would not get just from plants. So fire was a huge find for early humans. Now, as we talked about this word, systematic agriculture, this is where we see farming with a purpose, the growing of plants for food source. This is called domestication of plants. Now, if you don't know what this word domestication means, if think about someone, domestic means within the home. So someone who is a domesticated dog, a dog that is a domesticated dog is a dog that lives in the home and not in the wild. The word domestic just basically means home. During the Neolithic age, humans learned how to plant crops, which gave them a predictable food source. Growing crops and taming food-producing animals caused an agricultural revolution. Wheat, shown here, was one of the first crops to be systematically grown. So now, again, we're using this fire, and we don't have to leave during the cold months. We're using fire to cook foods. Now we're using animals as food sources. Maybe, hogs or chickens for their eggs, whatever it is, whatever those animals are. And you're growing crops, and you're getting a predictable, within reason food source that if you plant it, there's decent rains and nothing terrible happens in the way of a natural disaster. At the end of the growing season, you will have food for the harvest to feed yourself and your family and your growing civilization, your growing group of people networked together. So now we're going to see people start grouping together. They'll start living, working, and playing together. And this is where we get our boom in civilization. Now let's look at some terms describing early humans. Scientific names are usually based on Latin or Greek roots. The pairs of names used to designate species of living things sometimes convey information about their characteristics or origins. So let's look at first the term hominid. Its root is in homo or homin, which means human being. The meaning of hominid is human-like. The characteristics are a human-like creature with the ability to walk erect or upright on 2 feet. Let's look at the word Homo sapiens. Sapi means wise. The meaning is a wise human. So you take the word homo, which means human-like, and sapien, you put those together, and you get the word wise human. Characteristics are the species to which modern human beings belong. So you are a Homo sapien. Moving on, we also have the word Homo habilis. Habila means able, meaning handy or human. So the meaning of Homo habilis, you take homo, which means human, and habil, which means able, and you get the word Homo habilis, a human species thought to have been the first to handle tools with precision. Those who actually were capable of handling tools with their hands. Again, the word homo means human, erectus means upright. This meaning is an upright human. Its characteristics are a human species that may have been the first to walk like modern human beings. The last word we're going to look at in describing early humans is the term Australopithecus. Now let's look at the root first. Astra means south. Look at that, Astra, A-U-S-T-R. What country, continent can you think of that actually begins with that, and where is it located? Now the word Pythic means 8. So together, Astra and Pitheca, south, and 8 means southern 8. Its characteristic is a group of human-like creatures, fossils of which were first found in southern Africa. So let's review what we've talked about today in the way of early humans from chapter 1, lesson 1. The first thing that we talked about were that early humans used tools for various reasons in their daily lives to survive, whether they be scraping, cutting, digging tools, puncturing tools, or they use these tools to survive in their daily lives just as we do today. Secondly, we learned that they domesticated crops and animals, which gave them a way of life more conducive to producing a large scale civilization where they could move away from their nomadic lifestyles. They were artists, they were painters, they were interested enough in the world around them to leave something behind for those who would come after them. And finally, during this period of time, they discovered fire, one of the most important inventions, so to speak, discoveries of this time, of all time. They discovered fire, which allowed them to develop more rapidly as modern civilized humans. Remember, tonight you have your guided reading activity, your GRA, on section 1 of chapter 1. That is due tonight by midnight. Also, you have a vocab quiz at the next class meeting. Study for that, please. Don't forget to get online and look at your discussion questions. We have a forum set up with 3 questions that you need to be answering over the course of time throughout this chapter. Some of the questions may take you ahead in the material. That's okay. I don't want you to wait until everything is done before you start addressing those questions. And if at any time you have a question of me, please don't forget to go online again on Moodle. I have a Q&A session set up. Some of your friends, your classmates may have the same or similar questions, and someone else may have the answer. If you know that answer, do not be afraid as a student to type a response. I may even give you extra credit for helping out your classmate or even someone across in another class. That forum is open to all 3 sections of my world history. See you guys next meeting. Have a good day.